Before we dive into this explosive story, let me ask you a question. Have you ever witnessed a political moment so shocking, so raw, that it didn't just make headlines? It made history. That's exactly what happened in this closed-door Democratic summit when Stacey Abrams, the woman once hailed as the party's unshakable queen of strategy, completely lost control. And what Jasmine Crockett did in response? It left every single person in that room stunned, speechless, and it may have just redrawn the map of Democratic politics forever. If you want more behind-the-scenes political drama that the mainstream media tries to bury, make sure you smash that like button, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Now let's get into it. The tension in the air that day was already thick enough to cut with a knife. The Democratic National Strategy Summit wasn't supposed to be about conflict. It was designed as a show of unity, a chance for the party to present one face, one vision, one strategy heading into the next major election cycle. Donors were present, strategists were present, media representatives, carefully selected, were seated in the back rows. This wasn't meant to be fireworks. This was meant to be order, control, and coordination. And then everything unraveled. At the center of the room, seated at the head table, was Stacey Abrams. To her supporters, she's a legend. The voting rights champion who fought to flip Georgia, the woman who nearly became governor, the face of modern Democratic resistance. She arrived at the summit as royalty, carrying a reputation that made her nearly untouchable. In Democratic circles, to question Abrams was to question the foundation of the party itself. But across from her sat someone who wasn't there to play by those rules, Jasmine Crockett. Younger, sharper, and far less impressed by political hierarchy, Crockett carried the energy of a rising generation that no longer wanted to whisper criticism in hallways or defer to established icons. She was there to speak plainly, even if it meant ruffling feathers. The summit's theme was supposed to be about voter engagement, especially among younger Americans. On paper, it was a perfect topic for Abrams, who built her national profile on expanding voter access. She delivered her opening remarks with her usual polish, calm, controlled, rehearsed. It was the kind of speech donors love, the kind that earns nods of approval from longtime party loyalists. But in that very same room sat restless staffers, frustrated activists, and younger leaders who didn't want polished speeches. They wanted answers. They wanted fire. They wanted to know why their peers were turning away from the Democratic Party in record numbers. And then came Jasmine Crockett's turn to speak. Nobody in that room could have predicted the storm she was about to unleash. Nobody expected her words to slice straight through the party's safe messaging. But when she spoke, she didn't just challenge ideas. She challenged legacies. She challenged power. She challenged Stacey Abrams herself without even saying her name. And that's when the Summit of Unity turned into the Summit of Division. What happened next would take that carefully orchestrated unity event and flip it upside down. Stacey Abrams had just finished her presentation, a polished masterpiece about voting rights, democracy protection, and the dangers of Republican suppression tactics. It was classic Abrams, inspiring, safe, and applauded by the older establishment figures in the room. Donors nodded, activists clapped politely, and you could almost feel the expectation that the summit would stay on script. But then, Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, adjusted her mic, and opened her mouth. From the very first sentence, you knew this wasn't going to be business as usual. Her voice was sharp, unflinching, and it cut through the air like a blade. We keep talking about voting rights like it's 1965. The room froze. Eyes darted. You could hear the shuffle of paper stop, the faint buzz of phones suddenly grow louder. This wasn't the line people had come to hear. This was the line that would make history. Crockett didn't hesitate. She went straight for the jugular, not of the Republican Party, but of her own. She accused Democratic leaders of clinging to outdated strategies, of fighting yesterday's battles, while ignoring the reality that young Americans can't afford rent, can't escape student loans, and can't see a future in the promises being sold to them. The silence in the room was heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was charged with discomfort, with recognition, and with an unspoken truth many were too afraid to say out loud. Crockett had just said it for them. Older Democrats in the room shifted uneasily in their seats, whispering under their breath. But among the younger staffers, the interns, the assistants, the next wave of operatives, you could see something else, a spark, a look of validation. Finally, someone was voicing what they had been feeling for years. And then Crockett dropped the line that made it personal, even though she never said Abrams' name. Some of our most celebrated leaders are more interested in maintaining their brand as democracy defenders than actually delivering the economic changes that would make democracy feel worth defending. Boom, that was the moment. You could almost feel the temperature in the room spike. Everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. Stacey Abrams' entire post-2018 career had been built on being the democracy defender, the voting rights champion. Crockett had just questioned the very foundation of Abrams' brand. Abrams' face tightened, her jaw clenching ever so slightly. The cameras in the room caught it, donors caught it, reporters caught it, and everyone watching understood. This was no longer about messaging. This was personal. The moderator tried to keep things moving, shuffling notes, smiling nervously, but the atmosphere had shifted. The Unity Summit had just become a battlefield. And Crockett, she wasn't backing down. Her words didn't just challenge strategy, they challenged power, hierarchy, and the myth that no one inside the Democratic Party could ever question Stacey Abrams. This wasn't just a disagreement. This was the spark that would set the entire room ablaze. The moment Jasmine Crockett's words landed, the atmosphere in that room changed forever. Stacey Abrams, the woman who built her career on grace under pressure, was suddenly no longer the calm strategist everyone expected. You could see it in her face, the jaw tightening, the eyes narrowing, the stillness before the storm. And then it happened. Abrams rose slowly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. It was the kind of sound that makes everyone freeze. Her hands trembled, not with nerves, but with rage barely contained. For years, Abrams had been the symbol of composure, the voice of reason in chaotic times. But on this day, Jasmine Crockett had struck a nerve so deep it shattered that image. Her voice, low at first, carried across the silent room. Congresswoman Crockett, I think you fundamentally misunderstand what this summit is about and, frankly, what the Democratic Party stands for. Phones buzzed, pens stopped moving, every eye was locked on the two women. Donors shifted nervously in their seats, as if they were watching a car crash unfold in slow motion. But Crockett didn't flinch. She leaned forward, her voice steady, almost calm. No, I understand perfectly what this party stands for. The question is whether what we stand for is actually working for the people we claim to represent. That was it. The fuse was lit. Abrams' composure slipped further with every second. She snapped back, her voice sharper, louder. I've been fighting for voting rights since before you even decided to run for office. I've delivered results. I've flipped states. I've built coalitions that actually win elections. But Crockett countered without missing a beat. And yet here we are, losing young voters to apathy because we keep telling them their biggest problem is voter suppression instead of economic suppression. That line hit like a thunderclap. Younger aides in the back nodded subtly. Older party loyalists looked horrified. Abrams saw it too, and her voice cracked with fury. So your solution is to abandon the fundamental fight for democracy? To give up on voting rights because it's not trendy enough for TikTok? Crockett stood now, matching Abrams' energy. My solution is to acknowledge that democracy isn't just about the right to vote. It's about whether that vote can actually change people's lives. And right now, for too many Americans, it doesn't. The moderator tried to step in, his voice shaky. Ladies, perhaps we could... But Abrams cut him off, her voice rising, filled with fire. No, this is important. What I'm hearing is that the work I've done, the work that saved our democracy in 2020, doesn't matter because it doesn't fit into some new progressive purity test. The room was holding its breath. And then Abrams snapped. Her face flushed, her hands clenched into fists, her voice booming so loudly it echoed into the hallway. Get out! Just get out of here right now! Phones flew into the air as people recorded. Gasps rippled across the room. Donors looked stunned. Reporters' fingers flew across keyboards. And the summit that was supposed to showcase Democratic unity had just turned into the most public meltdown of Abrams' career. And there stood Jasmine Crockett, calm, unflinching, staring directly at Abrams with the kind of poise you'd expect from a seasoned heavyweight fighter. She didn't back down. She didn't apologize. She simply let the silence stretch until her reply cut through the chaos like lightning. No. One word. Clear, defiant. And in that single moment, the entire balance of power shifted. But that was only the beginning. You are about to see how this confrontation didn't just rock the room, it sent shockwaves across the country. Media, donors, and even fellow Democrats were forced to take sides. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss how the aftershocks of this clash reshaped the Democratic Party's future.
When Stacey Abrams shouted, "Get out," it wasn't just a command, it was a political earthquake. The room went dead silent, but the silence didn't last. Within seconds, phones were raised high, cameras rolling, and history was being captured in shaky video clips that would soon dominate the internet. What was supposed to be a message of unity for the Democratic Party had just collapsed into the most public meltdown of Abrams' career. And Jasmine Crockett? She didn't retreat, she didn't stammer, she didn't blink. With a calm, steady voice, she looked Abrams in the eye and delivered that one devastating word: no. That reply wasn't just defiance, it was defiance with composure, and it turned her from a rising star into a household name overnight. Inside the room, you could see the split immediately. Older Democratic operatives looked horrified, whispering frantically to one another. Donors sat frozen, some with expressions of shock, others with quiet disapproval. But in the back of the room, among the younger aides, the assistants, the interns, you could see something else entirely. Heads nodding, eyes shining. They had just watched someone stand up to the establishment and win. The confrontation spilled out of the summit almost instantly. Clips of Abrams shouting, "Get out!" and Crockett's unflinching "no" hit social media before Abrams had even returned to her chair. Within 30 minutes, Crockett versus Abrams was trending nationwide. On Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, the moment replayed on endless loop. Abrams red-faced, Crockett calm and fearless. Cable news couldn't resist. MSNBC rushed to frame it as a heated disagreement, but couldn't hide the cracks it revealed in Democratic ranks. CNN ran wall-to-wall coverage, branding it a generational clash for the soul of the party. Fox News, predictably, had a field day, painting the Democrats as divided and in chaos. But even some conservative commentators found themselves praising Crockett's composure under fire. The fallout inside the party was immediate. Some leaders scrambled to defend Abrams, pointing to her record and contributions, but others, especially younger progressives, saw Crockett's defiance as a breath of fresh air. Representative Ayanna Pressley tweeted about the importance of healthy debate, while Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez called Crockett's response what accountability looks like. Progressive groups like Justice Democrats and the Working Families Party issued statements hailing her courage. But perhaps the most telling reactions came from the donor class. Mega donor Reid Hoffman, who had been in the room, later issued a carefully worded statement about the need for leaders who can engage with criticism constructively. Translation: Abrams had just lost him. Other donors, once firmly in Abrams' camp, quietly paused their commitments. Money was shifting, and in politics, money talks. Outside the donor bubble, the public response was even more divided. Polling in the days after showed a stark generational split. Voters over 50 saw Crockett as disrespectful, but voters under 35 overwhelmingly sided with her. To them, Abrams' outburst symbolized everything wrong with establishment politics: ego, fragility, and an unwillingness to adapt. Crockett, on the other hand, represented the boldness they'd been waiting for. What was supposed to be a closed-door event had turned into a generational referendum. And in that moment, it became clear this was no longer just a clash of personalities. It was a battle over the future of the Democratic Party. But the real question came next. What would happen when the dust settled? We'll see how Abrams struggled to recover, how Crockett's star rose even higher, and how this one explosive confrontation became a turning point in modern Democratic politics. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the ending of this story is one you won't want to miss. The dust may have settled inside that summit room, but the aftershocks were only just beginning. What unfolded in those 20 explosive minutes didn't stay behind closed doors. It detonated across the entire Democratic Party, leaving fault lines that may never heal. For Stacey Abrams, the fallout was brutal. For years, she had been the steady hand, the symbol of unshakable composure, the face of Democratic discipline. But after the summit, clips of her red-faced shouting "Get out" played on loop across the internet. Her carefully built image cracked in a single afternoon. Donors she once counted on began hesitating. Endorsements she could always secure now came with conditions. Even some of her closest allies urged her to stay silent for a while, hoping the storm would pass. When Abrams finally broke that silence, it was too late. Her apology, carefully crafted and posted online, sounded flat, almost forced. She spoke of respectful debate and shared goals, but the damage was done. The public had already made up its mind. Abrams had lost her cool, while Jasmine Crockett had kept hers. Meanwhile, Crockett's star exploded onto the national stage. The clips of her calm, defiant no didn't just circulate among progressives. They became a rallying cry for a younger generation of voters who felt ignored by establishment politics. Invitations flooded her office. Progressive groups wanted her at rallies. Unions wanted her on panels. Even mainstream Democrats, the same ones who once dismissed her as too blunt, began to take notice. Inside the halls of power, the impact was just as dramatic. Crockett was suddenly included in high-level strategy meetings. Her phone buzzed with messages from colleagues who once kept their distance but now wanted her insight. Donors, yes, the same ones Abrams had once dominated, began cutting checks to Crockett's initiatives, and whispers began. Whispers about whether this showdown had just revealed the next big name in Democratic politics. But beyond personal careers, the confrontation forced the party itself to confront a bigger truth. It was no longer just about voting rights versus economic populism. It was about identity. Was the Democratic Party going to cling to its old guard, or was it finally ready to evolve into something that younger, struggling voters could believe in? That's the real legacy of that room. Not just a shouting match, not just a viral moment, but a generational reckoning. Stacey Abrams symbolized the past, Jasmine Crockett symbolized the future, and the party, caught in the middle, was left to choose. One thing was certain: American politics would never see Abrams the same way again, and it would never underestimate Jasmine Crockett again. And that's the story of how a summit meant to unify the Democrats turned into the defining showdown of a generation. Stacey Abrams yelled, "Get out," but Jasmine Crockett's calm refusal to back down echoed louder than the shout. It wasn't just a clash, it was a turning point. What do you think? Was Crockett right to challenge the establishment, or did she cross the line? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one of them. And don't forget, hit that like button, share this with your friends, and subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into the political drama reshaping America. Because if this story proved anything, it's that the fight for the future of the Democratic Party has only just begun.